This is Uncle Stu, and in Seat at the Table today, we're going to ask an imperative question. Are we a people who are simply a reactionary people? Or are we people who can be able to act and deal with any situation that comes upon us? This is very imperative question that we need to ask ourselves in today's times. Why? Because if we don't understand the difference between history and facts of history and how people may have acted or responded in history, then we really don't understand how to navigate the here and right now. And I'm going to tell you up front, this came from one of the commenters in the comment section, and I want you to know I'm going to use his comment in order to produce this video because I believe it is a topic worthy of discussion, as well as letting you know that when you write in the comments, I do read them. I try to respond to as many as possible, but this comment needs to be placed in my Why Some of Us Is Poor video series. Let's get into this video.
Emancipated Studios presents Come and Have a Seat at the Table with Uncle Stu.
As I stated in my introduction, this video was inspired by a commenter, and we're going to read his comment right now. And I want to make it clear before I read the comment that this is not to shame you as a commenter. This is not to shame your thoughts, your views, and your opinions on a particular topic that I discuss within the video. But what I am going to emphasize here is this statement or this comment is a mindset that I'm seeing not only online conversation, but offline conversation. And I think that it really needs to be broken down and understood, because I believe that if a certain mindset continues, it's going to keep a certain section of the African American community in poverty. And it's going to keep us in poverty, keep us in want, and keep us in a failing mind state as opposed to a productive, successful mind state. So let's hear the comment and let's really dig deep in understanding everything that's going on within this comment. So the commenter writes, Black people are scorned and discriminated against in America because we were freed from slavery. Everything that has happened to us, everything we go through is because of our emergence from chattel slavery. Our population numbers of 45 million in a country of more than 320 million is, now you put our problem, I guess is not our problem. I'm not sure of the wording on that one. But then he continues to write, we need to stop blaming the victim and start blaming the victimizer. For some people, they would say this is a victim mindset. I'm going to ease up on the victim mindset. I'm not going to go and attack that aspect. What I am going to do is lay out for you a kind of argument that I see. I want us to dig deeper into this. And if you thought like this or you think like this, then I'm going to try to help you to navigate your mindset out of this. Why? Because I believe there's some truths, but there's some falsehoods into this mindset that is keeping a certain segment of the African American community poor. And again, I've heard this before, so he is not the author. I don't believe this is just an online argument. I believe it's definitely offline, and I see it in many different places. So let's really get into this quotation. There needs to be two words that is definitely needs to be understood. What is Black history versus what is Black studies? There are two different academia thoughts, Black history versus Black studies. And when we understand these two dynamics, we can further understand how I'm going to answer this commenter's statement. Let's look at this short video.
Teaching African American studies in, do I say correctly, public schools in Orlando, Florida?
Yes. So African American history in public schools, yes, which is a big difference. And I think that has confused a lot of folks, the difference, because African American studies is an analytical approach to history and to Black experience. But I teach African American history or Black history, which is, to me, a night and day difference.
Just was going to ask you to say a little bit more about the difference in your mind between African American studies on the one hand and African American history on the other. Would you?
Right. So I think, like I said, I think it confuses a lot of people when you hear African American studies and African American history. Folks just assume it's the same. And it isn't. So the African American studies is more, like I said, an analytical approach to what we call the Black experience, to history. There is a lot of truths in African American studies, but it's also met with conjecture and a lot of opinion. And I think sometimes with African American studies, the truth and opinion gets mixed in together. And if you don't know history, if you don't know African American history or Black history, you would think the opinions are the truth. And then when you talk about Black history or African American history, it's simply facts. You cannot argue with facts. We know slavery existed. We know that Black people were dehumanized during slavery. We know that Jim Crow existed. These are facts. But with African American studies, you can argue about things like reparations or whether or not you think American descendants of slaves deserve reparations. You can argue in African American studies about whether systemic racism exists today. But in African American history, you can't argue whether systemic racism existed during Jim Crow era, because it did. There is facts, there's proof. There were laws written for Black people that held them back. But you can argue today in African American studies whether or not it still exists for Black people. So I think that is the difference, and many people just mixed up to combine the two.
Now you heard what she had to say. This is how I'm going to respond. A lot of things I believe that was in his comments were strictly emotional and subjective. The reason I say it's more emotional and subjective is because it takes the assumption, or it makes the assumption, that African Americans didn't do anything and that our whole life is just under this everyday pressure of what is defined as white supremacy. And my argument to this statement is this. We know that certain things happen historically. That's not without a doubt. But the question becomes, did we react, or did we have things that we just acted as the situation and circumstances took place? The second thing that is missing from this argument, and I see it missing on a continual basis, in spite of white supremacy, in spite of the laws and things that was going on in this country, there's a history that seems to keep getting lost. Black people were still thriving in this country. Black people was thriving and created more cities in this country. In spite of what was going on throughout the 100 years of, quote, Reconstruction. We forget that we built 113 historically Black colleges. We forget that we built cities in major states, not just Oklahoma. Raleigh, North Carolina is a major city that was built on the backs of Black people. Charlotte is another city that was built on the backs of Black people. Areas in Florida was built off the backs of Black people. Harlem, New York was built off the backs of Black people. South Boston was built on the back of Black people. Chicago was founded by a Black man. Los Angeles was also part of the Black historical experiences. In our mindset that I am noticing is that we are taking history and subjectively saying, well, we don't have control over our own self. I argue that a lot of Black people, even that was coming out of southern states, they had their own agency. If they didn't have their own agency, there would be no such thing as the Southern Great Migration. If it was so bad, they couldn't even migrate to up north to find something, a piece of freedom or a piece of a place where they can have opportunities to be in their total humanity. I think we neglect studying that in spite of the laws that happen, the laws that we can see stop certain groups of Black people in certain cities or certain states, the thriving aspect of the Black culture, the Black church flourished in spite of racism and white supremacy. Black economics flourished in spite of white supremacy and racism. And after the 60s and the 70s, Black people continue, in spite of everything going on today, we continue to flourish and thrive and take responsibility for our own agency. In this comment, he makes the statement about everything we do comes out of the chattel slavery experience. I'm 56. I don't come out of slavery. I've never been hit with a whip. I've never experienced being beat up with a whip. I don't have dogs chasing me all over the place. I don't have the experience of Jim Crow like my father had that experience. He could talk about that experience. He could talk about what he went through and how he went through it. My grandfather can talk about those experiences. But I can't talk about those experiences because I never lived those experiences. I have a total different experience of life. And I'm quite some of you have a total different experience of what it was like in slavery versus now. Now, I know someone is going to say, well, we have historical trauma, and that's a stretch of an argument. And I'm going to continue to state that's a stretch of an argument, and here's why. If that's the case, then we should also recognize that we have a stretch of cultural success in this country. Places like Phoebus in Hampton, Virginia, a city that thrived right after Civil War, a state that was the beginning of slavery, but it was also a state that was the first to end slavery. And they thrived in a city and created a university where, if you want to argue, Phoebus Hampton was another Tulsa, Oklahoma. They have businesses, they have homes, and is now considered a historical site today. Black people are thriving and they are successful in spite of the many different things we can say or try to identify as being white supremacy or racism. The other thing is that who do you give your power to? What do I mean by give your power? When we submit to these terms and we say, well, we can't do anything because of white supremacy. We need to blame the victimizer. Well, the question is, who directly is victimizing you? Meaning, who is that one individual that's causing you not to get up and go to work on time? What's causing you not to develop a business? What's causing you not to be cussing out your neighbors? What's causing you not to run around and destroy your own neighborhood, whether you own the house or you're renting the house? What's causing you to do that? Are you going to say that we as a people are so mentally weak, we're so docile that we can't do for ourselves? Therefore, are we going to play perpetual boyhood? We're going to perpetually blame things that's in our power to control. You and I in 2023 can control how we spend our money. We control that. No white man is coming into our homes and saying, you better pay us. You better do this. We have the ability, if we don't like it in America, and I know this is going to tick some people off, but I got to say it as is. We got the power and the freedom that if we don't like America, we can get our passports and we can get a visa and we can go to any country In Africa, we feel like it. They couldn't do that during slavery. They could barely do that during Jim Crow. But we have that freedom. We have a freedom in America that we could be a part of a system, or we can help to navigate people through the system. But then we got to define the system. So many times I find us looking backwards and saying, well, back in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they did this. None of us lived those times of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Well, back in the days, they did this. That's back in the days. Was you there back in those days? We have to start learning that I agree with the one part when he says the victimizer. The question is, are you self-victimizing yourself? Are you the one looking in the mirror and not recognizing that you do have this level of freedom of choice and of thought and of expression, but you choose not to learn, or you choose not to do what you can do in your power? We have more black billionaires than we ever had in the last 50 years. We have more black millionaires than we ever have in the last 50 years. We have more successful black people than what some of us could even recognize or realize. And yet, there's this idea that white supremacy is so powerful that black people can't thrive, even in this America. If white supremacy was so powerful, I want you to think about this. If white supremacy was so powerful, how would white supremacy allow not one, but three, if I'm not mistaken, 3 black women, or at least 2 black women, to prosecute and convict Donald Trump? I just want to leave you with that, because a white supremacist country would not allow this. They wouldn't allow you to attack one of their own, in theory, of this white supremacy system. Now, I'm not denying that racism isn't around, and I'm not denying that people can't be racist. And let's really understand racism. It means you deny me my personhood, that you have a power to deny me access to jobs or colleges or me getting money because of my race. That's racism. And I do understand systematic in the sense of laws written that based on my color, you purposely discriminate against me. This is what can be argued. However, is it systematic when we mismanage money? Is that really a white thing, or is that an American thing? Is it racism when we are violent against each other? I mean, is a white man really coming in our neighborhood and saying, take this gun and go shoot your brother? I want us to start thinking above the emotional feelings and really take a deep dive in your room, in your house, in your apartment, in your car, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and dig deep. Before you give my comments and want to argue about something that happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago, some court case that's not even in your own city or state, I want you to dig deep and ask yourself, who has the power over my mind, my heart, and my soul? Who really has that power? And I challenge you that you have that power. So before we run around blaming people, whether they're white, they're black, they're Spanish, they're women, whatever, whoever we want to blame, at the end of the day, you can blame white America for everything. But how has that solved your very problem? Today, I'm going to argue, and it's a definite fact. 40 years ago, we can argue that gentrification was a white thing. We could say, this place was gentrified by white America. This was gentrified by white America. But today, in cities like Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, various areas of outside of Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, and the areas of Matthews, North Carolina, areas like North Virginia, and other areas of Virginia, places like PG County, these places are being gentrified by Black people. There are Black people that's moving from New York and moving to these cities. They're doing the regentrification now. There are places in Texas where most of the people that's going into Texas is out of California. They're Black and gentrifying. They are the ones who are now the new gentrification. So is that a white thing, a Black thing, or is it an economic thing? And I know some people's going to say, oh, here go this Black conservative. Take that word away. Am I blaming? No, I'm educating. And there's a difference in let me educate you to be a best version of yourself versus blaming you. Once again, I'm not denying that there was not laws on the books and things in that regard. But what I am saying in this particular video is that when we talk about blaming the victim, is the victim ourselves? And I think too many times we, as a people, we tend to blame everything on everybody, but we never analyze the choices and the freedoms we have right now. Am I saying America is perfect? No, I'm not. Am I saying the Democrats or the Republicans is perfect? No, I'm not. Am I saying being a conservative or a liberal is the perfect choices? No, I'm not. Because I can dig deep in history and I can find where the Republicans was wrong, where the Democratic Party was wrong, even where the Independent Party was wrong. Again, I'm about policy over personality, but I'm also about us taking the opportunity to say, in spite of, we can be winners. I know it's a struggle for some in America, but then for a lot of us, we don't have to struggle. If we can do little things to get little wins to put us in a little winning position. I have several videos getting ready to come out. I'm still going to go into who's teaching you this narrative. Who's teaching you this narrative? And I'm going to tell you something just to give you a little piece of a crumb of exactly where that video is going. My next video is, I find it real funny that the very people teaching you this narrative about you're oppressed, they're rich and you poor. Let me say that again. Going to tell you in my next video, people that seems to be teaching you this idea that you oppressed, that you can't move, that you can't do nothing, that the white man is holding you down, the American system is holding you down, the Constitution of the United States is holding you down. These very people are multimillionaires. Let me make it real clear. They seem to be multimillionaire Blacks teaching you this stuff. College professors who don't live in your neighborhood, don't live in your community. And when they make it, they don't stay in the quote hood or in poor neighborhoods, but they're telling you you're oppressed, yet they're successful. My next video, we got to make that make sense. So I'm going to end the video right here. I want to thank you. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel. Please leave all the comments that you want, and I'm definitely going to take a deep dive and read these comments. You may disagree with me, and that's okay. But I just want us to start rethinking what we're thinking, refocusing on us and being the best version of us that we can be. If there's an issue or there's a topic you want me to cover, or you want my thoughts and views and opinions on, please leave it in the comment below, and I'll definitely read it, and I'll definitely put it in this big list that I have on many different topics that I plan to cover. Hopefully, I can get finished with this series on why we are poor this week, because I want to move on to the topics of school choice and some of the things that's happening within our school system. So, this is Uncle Stu with Seat at the Table. Peace.